Good evening. This is our special meeting on Tuesday, March 7th, 2023. Mr. Wade, please call the roll.
Ms. Briner.
Here.
Ms. Cook.
Here.
Ms. Jessling.
Present.
Ms. Payne.
Here.
Mr. Tuttle.
Present. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to share some expectations of this meeting, which is intended to be a work session for the board. As always, the community is welcome to be here with us, and we thank you for your interest in our schools. As we are trying to work through an array of topics this evening as a board, there will not be an opportunity for the audience to speak or participate. But please know, comments from the community members are welcome during the hearing of the public section of our regularly scheduled meetings. This is not a regular scheduled meeting. As the board president, it's my job to enforce the rules of the meeting so that the board can conduct its business. We kindly ask everyone to respect the expectations of this evening's meeting. We are all invested in the Mentor schools and care deeply about our students and staff. We are all committed to working hard for our community's children and providing a high-quality education where students can learn and grow academically, socially, and emotionally. There's a lot of work to do tonight, and I look forward to getting meaningful conversation and discussion underway among the board. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll now move to the Board of Education report and recommendations. Mr. Heath.
It is recommended for approval of the following overnight out-of-state field trip at no cost to the Board of Education.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll, Mr. Wade.
Ms. Briner.
Yes.
Ms. Payne.
Yes.
Ms. Cook.
Yes.
Ms. Jessling.
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you for doing that this evening, too. I know Ms. LaPaglia has some planning to do, so she wanted to get that done. And even 1 week ahead of time helps, so thank you. So for business this evening, obviously, there's been a lot of conversations around school safety, and we wanted to make sure that we devoted some time just to kind of go through some updates, number one, and then hopefully dig into some conversation, number two. Kind of the way we're hoping to structure this here this evening, we'll take about the first 45 minutes here in open session to do some of the pieces. There are some other things that we need to discuss in executive session just due to the confidential nature of some of that information regarding school safety. So the first 45 minutes or so here, we hope to plow through a couple of things here with some training, some things on safety grants, and then also talking a little bit about our structures, our policies and procedures, and kind of put some timelines to what it is that we're hoping to be able to do. To get us started here, I thought we'd jump into some safety training pieces just as FYIs here for the board, and then if there are questions, obviously you can feel free to ask. A couple of things that we do have coming up. Number one is ALICE training for some of those administrators and staff members that have not been through that here in Mentor recently, myself included. We are going to be going through that ALICE training here on March 17th, so next Friday. We'll be doing that here in our Fine Arts Center at the high school. Also, a couple of other things just of interest. The Mentor Police Department is going to be conducting some drills during spring break. That's going to be March 20th through the 25th. That will be from 7:30 a.m. through 5:30 p.m. They're going to have multiple shifts coming through at that during those days and times. So that's going to be done here at the high school. Again, we'll be on spring break, so nobody will be there. They're going to be doing some pretty intense training around the high school. Number one, just to get some of the new police officers familiar with the building and the layout itself. But number two, to make sure that they're going through their traditional trainings that they do. There will be a lot of police vehicles around the high school at that time, so we just wanted to let you know and let the community know that that's going on, again, the 20th through the 25th. And finally, the last piece with some of our school safety training, we are up for a full-scale drill here this year. June 6th is going to be that full-scale drill. I think I've mentioned that a couple of times before. That's going to be at the high school again. That's going to be from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. So that entire morning, we will be doing that full-scale drill. A couple of things with that, just as far as the planning goes. Both Kristen Estes and I, who are traditionally on the safety team, would normally be part of that training, but we pulled ourselves out of that training or that planning just so that we can react just spontaneously as we're going through that. So all the little curveballs that they're going to be throwing at us with some of the emergency situations that pop, we'll be able to react in real time and see how we enact these protocols. One of the other pieces that we will more than likely do as well, and this is why I want to bring this up to the board here this evening too, is our normal communication as we've gone through a couple of things here this year. I will continue to update you as if we are in the middle of an actual emergency, just so that we have some of that communication flow, and you can, again, kind of be part of that drill as well, just seeing what's going on. I've been assured that there are some very interesting curveballs to this one this year, so it should be a very good drill. But something that, again, just trying to fulfill our obligations, make sure that we're tooled up with what we need to do in the event of a major issue that might come up. Are there questions, comments
Yes.
about school training?
The ALIS training, do you have an approximate number on how many people are going to be in that training? And is this going to be the last of the training?
It won't be the last. We'll continue to do that as we get additional administrators as well. I can't remember the total number. I want to say it's in the 20s with the people that we need to train. We've had new support staff that have come on board, new administrators that have come on board since the last time we've done this, which again, I believe was pre-COVID. So we'll be training quite a few people that day.
So these are really just the newer people that have come on. Got it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Craig, do you know if any of these trainings include like hearing a real gunshot?
I don't know yet, potentially with that full-scale drill. I do know the spring break drills that the police department are doing are supposed to be active shooter drills, so I believe they're going to be doing the gunshots there. Our staff are not involved in those over spring break, but we're not 100% certain what that full-scale drill is going to entail just yet.
The only reason I asked that is because one of the trainings that I went to mentioned that there were a couple school shootings where the administrators or the teachers heard the sound, but they didn't know what it was because they never heard a gunshot. And so they said, that's just one piece to kind of be aware of, that not everybody knows what that sounds like.
Right.
And if you can identify it easier, you can react faster, so.
Yeah, and it was very interesting going through that training in a previous district. How that sounds within the hallways of a
Right.
school. It could be completely different than what you would normally hear,
Yeah.
if you're outside and hear a gunshot. So that's very good training to have. If that is not incorporated into this full-scale drill, that'll be something that will continue our conversations with our safety team, including Officer or Chief Gunch and Chief Searles from the fire department are part of that too. So.
For both of those events, will there be some minor communication, at least with the larger community, just to reassure them that it's a drill, if there's not something desperate?
Yes.
Scary?
We asked that question as well, and the police department has indicated that they will have signs outside of the high school just to let everybody know that we're conducting a drill on both of those days.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't want somebody to be alarmed and be
Right.
calling them to come.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and blocking
Right.
911, you know, because.
Yeah.
Interesting that you brought that up as well. We had a safety meeting yesterday that Kristen and I were actually part of as well, and one of the things that was brought up towards the end of that meeting was if we were to have this large-scale event going on, and I'm wondering if this may be part of what they're planning as well, what happens if there's something else that happens that's major within the community, maybe not directly involving the schools, but if all of those resources are here and something else happens, how do we respond to that as well? So I think this is going to be a great training for our police and fire departments as well.
If it doesn't bring up the harder questions, it doesn't do its full job.
Exactly. Any other questions on the training aspect? Awesome. So next topic I want to touch on here is school safety funding. A couple of things is we've been having some continued conversations in our team meetings on a weekly basis. We had a pretty big conversation around school safety here this week. This week, yesterday. So a couple of things that I at least wanted to mention here to the board. We do have a school safety budget. It's approximately $320,000. We kind of work through those requisitions through Bill's office, obviously. Predominantly, those funds are going to be spent on our school resource officers, not only our full-time resource officer at the high school, but on those rotating officers that we have at Shore, Memorial, and Ridge. We're trying to figure out, okay, how do we continue to bolster that funding source? Obviously, there are a couple of things that are out there right now that are going to help us, which we'll talk about here shortly as well. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up, since we're talking school resource officers, I know a lot of us around the table have had those conversations around, how do we get a school resource officer in every building? And a couple of different things have been tossed around as potential ideas. One of the things that we're very excited about in the governor's State of the State address was his desire or suggestion that if a school wanted a school resource officer in a building, that they would provide the funding for it. So when we got our funding for that, we got $51,000 total
That doesn't go far.
for 11 buildings. So I did ask Chief Gunch yesterday if we could get 11 resource officers and pay them $4,000 apiece, and he kind of chuckled. So obviously, that's not going to do a lot for us. It's something, at least 51,000 is 51,000. We'll take whatever we can get and make that work. But just wanted to share a couple of other conversations that we've been having here recently as well. We had a lot of conversation pretty early on. I think it was back, was it third day?
I think it was your third day.
Third day with Ken Filipiak from the city. And he has very graciously offered to work with us on some of this. He wants to take it, I think, even a step further and actually use Mentor as a model moving forward. Couple of things with that. Number one, we would have to identify the funding sources. But if we have a partnership working between the city of Mentor, and we actually talked a little bit about Mentor on the Lake as well, since Lake Elementary School is located there, how might we all partner from a funding standpoint to try and pull some things together? There was conversations around levies and a combined levy that would be both the school district and the city working together and creating that dedicated funding stream on an annual basis to allow us to have a school resource officer in every building. There was conversation yesterday as well around how we might leverage our state senators, our state representatives right now to talk through maybe even some potential grant funding, some pilot funding, if we were to try and put a model together that other areas around the state could use, if that might be a way for us to secure some additional funding, because we do feel that this is of the utmost importance to us right now.
Has Chief Gunch expressed confidence or concern about being able to actually recruit enough officers? I think that's been,
So that's the one piece to the puzzle right now. And, the funding source is number one, and trying to secure that funding. Number two is finding the people. While they are fully staffed at the police department right now, it is a struggle to find people to want to step into those roles. So that would be the secondary piece to what it is that we're talking about. Again, it would be great if we could just have one person dedicated to each building, but oftentimes that's not how everything would work, and we would be looking at multiple people rotating through our different buildings within this model. So, Ken was talking about, 15 to 20 potential additional officers that would be needed. Part of the conversation actually revolved around having a dedicated department within the police department to really serve as that school resource officer group. One of the other things that, because again, I'm always putting on the academic hat to this too, the other piece that we started talking about is how do we start to grow our own? Obviously, we've got some students that are in the law enforcement program over in Euclid, but how do we maybe create that here internally in Mentor, that maybe we can look through CTE possibilities, some College Credit Plus opportunities through Lakeland to start to get students interested in this career field, knowing full well that there are going to be multiple job opportunities here when they graduate. The one drawback with that is they can't become a full-blown police officer until they're 21. So we're in the similar thing to the bus driver idea that we had too. Let's get our kids the CDL license. Well, they can't drive a bus until they're 21. They can't become a police officer until they're 21. But how do we get them on that path so that we have that dedicated personnel component, along with eventually what we hope to have as a dedicated funding source, that we can then put those two things together and have a great model in place.
I was going to say, has Chief Gunch talked about, just like in school nurses, they may prefer that setting
Right.
versus, let's say, a hospital work or whatever other avenue they might follow. And I would guess that in law enforcement, there could be a similar dual pathway of interest that I might like to do this part of it, but I don't necessarily want to be a regular community police officer, but we're not open 12 months out. I mean,
Right.
That's where, because I know when we talked about this in the beginning of last year, I had asked if we could look into Beechwood.
Yep.
Because they were using retired police officers to staff some of their buildings. And it sounded like they had a separate unit, but it was just retired police officers. Same
Yeah.
idea, these are people who didn't want to go back full in, but they would love to be resource officers.
Yeah.
Have we looked into
Yeah, so
that?
Bill Porter actually talked to the people over in Beechwood, and he's got that model as one of those things that we're going to continue to look at. I actually had a conversation with another police officer here recently when I was over at Memorial Middle School, and he has sent me some information kind of along the lines of the retired officer as well. He said that there are a small handful, but a handful of officers that are looking to retire relatively soon and would welcome maybe the school calendar as opposed to, Ginny, as you just mentioned as well.
24
The
hours a day.
the 24/7, police work, in the city. He was referencing a model that and Bill, I don't know if you know it, it's over at Riverside. So I've got to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah,
So
those
I've
are-
got that contact there.
Just retired sheriff's department guys that And ladies that fill in the different spots of the building.
So those are two different examples that we're looking at now. But I think there might be a handful, again, can we grow our own for part of it? But some of these that are just getting ready to retire, I think they have an interest. The guy that I was speaking with actually said there were probably 3 or 4 right now that he said would probably be interested. So, yeah, definitely something that we're going to continue to work with
What
there
was
too.
the cost was, don't quote me, Bill, I don't know, was it like 300 and something thousand if we were to staff them?
That was the number
Yeah.
I was thinking
Yeah,
too.
thought
I
it was
don't
like
know,
300,
we both had the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd had that I
Fifty.
refigured it's about 50,000 roughly a building for
Oh, so 550.
8 hours a day at $40 an hour, which is their off-duty rate. So at 180 days, so it comes out to be like $7,200 a building. So if you do all the 11 buildings, or the remaining buildings that we don't have, so
Right.
Fairfax, I think I even include Garfield, Hopkins, Lake, Orchard Hollow, and Sterling Morton, it comes out to be about an additional 50,000. So over the course of a 5-year forecast, about 250 grand.
Oh,
So
not bad.
that's where that number came from, yeah. So it's only,
Okay,
it's
250.
not only, but it's only about 50,000 a year if they're off duties, getting their $40 an hour rate.
So they would be officers who already had their benefit packages
Right.
coming from their main work, not from us. That's,
Ideally.
yeah, I mean, that would be a huge difference. Or if it's a retired policeman, they would have their pensions.
Right.
And if, even looking at, for example, Officer Scully, he's an active member of the department. His role as the high school resource officer, rather than maybe a retired officer,
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple different things that we'll continue to look at there too.
That math's wrong. I'll get it correct math on that. Let me,
I was like, I think it's lower than
it
it was
is.
before.
It's 50,000 per building, so it's 350,000 per year.
And that's assuming no benefits.
correct.
Oh, yeah.
Because they would be drawing that, either they're retired, or they would be drawing it from their main
Right.
there-
livelihood from the
Is
department.
there a way to gauge the interest from like can the Mentor Police Department gauge retirees and say like, if we did
Yeah.
this, would you be interested in it? Because obviously, I think having somebody in our building would be better than nothing, right?
Absolutely.
It's about 400,000 a year, all in,
Okay.
for the remaining buildings at that rate.
Would that cover Garfield as well?
Yes.
So we'll continue those conversations, but I just wanted to give you the update since we had a couple more conversations here just yesterday on some of that too. And I'm going to follow up with the individual that I spoke to at Memorial last week just to get a little bit more insight into who he's thinking might be interested in this too.
I know the last time we spoke about this too, some of the concerns that Mr. Porter brought to our attention were like how to manage once people are retired because they're not under the same like evaluation process that the police department would have, maybe even the same like protections, like when they're in the Mentor Police Department, they have their police union that's protecting them and, all of those things. So how does that fall within, how would that fall for us and what would that look like for our liability and things like that? We'd want
I think it
to,
goes to the partnership with the sheriff's department at the same time. I know
Okay.
Mr. Diamond was here, he was deputized as a
Okay.
sheriff, even though he'd
That's right, I
retired
forgot
from
about that, yeah.
MPD.
And that was that Riverside model that the gentleman was speaking to me about last week as well.
Yes, because Officer Bruning, who's a retired Mentor police officer, is now one of the school resource officers in our district that I live in.
and these officers are able to carry weapons and, everything.
Yeah,
So-
so they actually get sworn in as a police officer in the district that they're serving.
Okay,
And
fantastic.
So they would
Like the
still
Wild
have
West, you get
that.
deputized.
And they would still have to go through some of the same trainings, just to stay
And the
current, obviously.
recertification on the gun range and all that, because that was
Training.
Yeah,
always
that was always part of the concern.
stumbling block about not having regular
Yeah.
police officers.
Right, we'd be able to do the protective equipment and everything just through the district.
And again, I think that's part of, what Mr. Filipiak's thinking of as well is, what are all these little nuances to this that we might be able to put together in demonstrating that this model can work, from a funding and a personnel standpoint. So I think it's very exciting as, we've got some pretty good opportunities here. We just need to continue those conversations to keep that at the forefront. But again, the 51,000 was a little disappointing, but it's something. But let's see what else we can try and
They
get.
did their
We're
math
almost
the same
there,
way I
right?
did my math the first time.
Yeah.
0.
Maybe just point out where it's short, he could,
Yeah. Just a couple of other things with the funding then. We also get a certain amount of money each year from Title IV, the federal funding. I know for this year, Barb Bonas has about $6,000 set aside for radios. Obviously, we're going to talk about the grant here in just a second, which will also incorporate a lot of money for radios, but we are able to utilize some of that funding for school safety. And actually, that's the budget that we're using to pay for the ALICE training as well. So that's the other funding source that we currently have. So we have our safety budget set aside, and then we have our Title IV funding on an annual basis. Again, the exciting piece is we did get the school safety grant that Mr. Porter had submitted back in October. We will be getting approximately $900,000 split across 10 of our buildings. Garfield did not get funded because they no longer have an IRN. When we decommissioned that school as an elementary school, we no longer had the IRN. Even though we now have our preschool program over there, there's not a specific IRN attached to that.
It's also just for K-12, so we couldn't.
So he can't even do it. So that money is kind of divvied up, and I did share with you a little spreadsheet with a summary just to kind of give you an idea of what that breakdown was by building. The most that we could get for a particular building was $100,000. We actually have that for 4 of our buildings: Mentor High School, Memorial, Shore, and Ridge. The other elementary schools and CARES are anywhere in that $60,000 to $85,000 range. And again, back when the original grant writing group was meeting, we had technology involved in that. We had business operations. We had Rick Kolar from Buildings and Grounds included in those conversations. And really, it was going through some of the safety audit pieces that were part of that grant process, and identifying some of those things that we felt we could buy for all of the buildings across the district to try and make sure that we were somewhat consistent and streamline some of our pieces. So a lot of the budget is going to be spent on the following things. Exterior cameras, which we're just trying to broaden our coverage around all of the buildings. And we'll talk more about that in executive session. Radios and the infrastructure for those radios. And we want to get to a point where we're really streamlining that communication process across the district. So having the same type of radio across the entire district is going to be helpful. The other piece that we need for that are the repeaters. So that's kind of the infrastructure piece to it, so that those radios are not going to go down in the event of a major emergency happening. One of the things that obviously we've learned with some of the other emergency situations that we've had across the country is cell phone and internet usage is kind of ground to a standstill with all of the hits on the cell towers and the infrastructure there. Those radios will not succumb to any of that traffic, so we'll have those open lines of communication across the entire district. A couple of, obviously, our buildings are a little bit older in nature, and some of the PA systems are just as old as the building. So looking at improving those communications within the buildings, we do have PA systems as part of those grant funds. And again, that was one of those things that was identified in the audit as well. So we want to get those improved so that communications within the building are as good as possible in the event of an emergency. And the final thing is door sensors. Right now, we were identifying those at the CARES building and Garfield, because those are two of our buildings where our students tend to run the most and find a door and run out. And this will allow us to identify that, okay, we've got somebody that's either entering or exiting that particular door. The other building that we obviously were not able to get covered in the grant, but is something that we hope to be able to include in some of the door sensor pieces is our high school. We have 46 exterior doors in the high school, and how do we get those things secured? And how do we know if something's been propped open or left open or is not latching quite properly, and these sensors will help us with that. So that's one of the things that we're going to continue to look at as we move forward too. So those are the major pieces with that budget right now. It's going to cover a lot of what we'll talk about in executive session with the safety audit that was conducted. But that's kind of our starting point as far as how we're going to try to address some of the safety concerns there.
Do we have to budget then going forward to maintain all of those things?
That'll be the next part of our conversation here, actually. One other thing that I'll throw out is Auditor of State has a school safety grant project underway right now as well. Those applications are due March 31st. We're looking closely at those to see if we might qualify, and if so, for how much. One of the things that we would be looking at is how do we get Garfield covered, since we did not get grant funding for them. And then number two would be the door sensors, and how do we expand the use of those door sensors and get additional exterior doors covered. So we will continue to look at that, and hopefully, if we feel we can get that money, we'll get that application submitted. Questions there?
I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but on all of our doors, do we have on there to tell people if they're trying to come in to go to the front?
Where the
And then
entrance, the main entrance
students
is.
on the inside to tell them, like, don't open the door?
That's a good question. I don't know if we've got it on
I
the
didn't see it on
inside.
the inside.
We did, but
Let's see if we can get that up there.
Is there any law that backs that up? That could be posted as well?
As far as entering an unauthorized, that,
Unauthorized entry is trespassing?
that'd be worth looking at.
looking into.
Put that on there, too,
Yeah,
yeah.
you know, a simple sticker
Yeah.
above the door.
Like
handle.
ORC or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm sure
There's
there's
gotta be an
something
ORC.
that, whether
Any
it's,
statement about
We'll look into
illegal
that.
Or at least-
entry or trespassing or something.
yeah,
We could check with legal on that.
Yep.
that would be great.
Okay, I've got those two pieces down. So Ginny brought up kind of some planning pieces to the puzzle then as we move forward. And let me jump to the capital improvement plan piece first, because that's kind of where, we kind of left off with some of the funding pieces to the puzzle there. A couple of different things that we're looking at. Obviously, if we're buying a lot of radios and cameras and those sorts of things here this, at the end of this school year for our buildings. What is that replacement schedule? Bill and I have talked over and over again about, our capital improvement plan, and we've got that 5-year cycle set up so that we know within the next 5 years what roofs, what driveways, what parking lots, what buses, what computers need to be updated. We don't currently have that within our safety budget. So how do we get these cameras, these radios on that similar type of cycle? So we're going to have to look closely at, number one, what's the life cycle of one of those cameras and one of those radios, so that we can start to figure out exactly what that replacement schedule might look like. And then how do we start structuring that budget in the future to make sure that we're able to upgrade those and replace those when they're needed.
Because is it practical to imagine like an interior camera that doesn't have weather exposure? Could those, after 3 years, that becomes an outside camera, to finish its life out in the
Yeah.
elements, rather than kind of all or nothing? That way you have a cycle of new cameras coming in. And do we all have cameras on, or do we have cameras on all of our buses now?
That's a good question. Do you know if we have on all of them now? Kristen, you know?
I would say, I believe so too.
I know
but
it was
should-
most.
I'll
but
confirm that, though.
Yeah, because that would be another, while we're tying up loose ends, that would be another positive improvement.
Will our new radios immediately talk to the police department?
So that's the other piece that we had some conversation about yesterday, and that's with the cameras as well, is what access do our police and fire departments have to have those visuals from the cameras, to have the access to the radio talk as well. And those are some things that IT is working with and are pretty certain that we can start to provide that access. We know that from the camera standpoint, that's a definite. We actually had some conversations yesterday too about what's that lag time with what you're seeing on the video camera compared to what you see in person there in the building, and it's literally a second or two. They said it's almost immediate. What you're seeing is what's happening. So both Chief Gunch and Chief Searles were very pleased about that possibility, because they said, if we have that access to visualize what exactly is happening, they can immediately respond and have a very tactical response in that regard too.
Do our bus drivers have radios that would be able to also communicate with our new radios,
Oh, that's a good question.
so that they're not parallel systems?
Right. Wouldn't want them dropping them off into a building that was in a lockdown.
Right.
Right.
Or, just there's a variety of things, that's something that's observed, something that's happening, even a fender bender, whatever it might be, then they can communicate with the principal. The biggest thing too, I know occasionally a child forgets their stop or something happens like that, being able to communicate immediately with the office, or however that's going to best communicate what's needed for the parent.
And again, if you go back to our lockdown situation at Mentor High School, and that was one of the things, we had a bus coming back from another location, and, we were able to get them stopped, and they were in a holding pattern, at one of the shopping centers down the street, so that they weren't even entering the campus at that point. But, are there some other things that we might be able to do to help notify? And we'll talk about some of that in executive session, but there are some opportunities for us to put some improvements in place.
And we had talked about having an app available for parents to know. Is that going to be in our executive session, or that's something
No,
we're
so
working on?
I can mention that right now too, just from the bus standpoint, and we're looking very closely at that parent portal, that parent app for transportation purposes, just from a communication standpoint. I know it's been a struggle all year with that, and we're trying to find something that's is cost-effective, number one, but is also going to give us exactly what we want from a service standpoint, number two. We found one app that we thought was really good, but it doesn't communicate necessarily as well with our current routing software. So part of our conversation now is that maybe we look at doing just a complete overhaul of our routing software as well, which is a little bit outdated, quite honestly, at this point too. Yeah, and can we have the company that does the routing software also have the parent portal with the app so that we're buying one product that will be seamlessly working together, as opposed to trying to find this parent app that we're going to force fit into our current routing and not necessarily work very well. Yeah, Mike Lynch and Jeremy Woodworth might hurt me if we tried to do that, because it's such a challenge from the IT standpoint. So when we started talking about this a little bit more in depth, and we were real excited for a second and said, oh yeah, we got the perfect parent portal, well, let's roll it out and pilot it, and then we're like, hold on, it doesn't really talk to the routing thing, this isn't going to work. So that's when we shifted that conversation to just kind of an overhaul of both. So we're looking closely at a couple of different bus routing and parent app combinations right now. The other thing that I'll mention with that too is we've had a lot of conversation here with the ESC of Northeast Ohio. Actually, I was at another meeting this morning about this, and we're looking at, because transportation is a regional issue right now, and we're running into situations where, you know, we've got the bus driver shortage here. Well, Kirtland's having the issue, Wycliffe's having the issue, Perry's having the issue, Chardon, Kenston, you know, everything in that Lake Geauga corridor, you know, it's a challenge. So we've been trying to talk about, you know, what might this look like if we all work together on things. And it's impossible to get somebody trained now because our trainers are driving buses during the day, so we can't train the people that need to be trained, and it's taking a long time. So, you know, if we pooled some of our resources a little bit from a training standpoint, and then we've been talking about the routing software and the parent portal apps, that's the other thing that we want to make sure that whatever we're going to be doing here, what are some of those other districts around here? I know Willoughby Eastlake's got one that seems to be working pretty well for them. I believe Chardon has one as well. Talking to Mike a little bit today too. So there are a couple that we're going to take a closer look at and hopefully finalize that and have that ready to go for the coming school year.
That's perfect. I was just going to ask, do we think we
Time-wise.
can have it ready for August?
And the nice thing is I've had a lot of good email exchanges with a couple of parents that have had concerns about the communication piece, and I'm like, I apologize. Yes, I know, we're working through some things. Would you be willing to be one of our test pilots with this when we finally get something? If we're able to pilot this, would you be able to be that front-facing piece for us so that we can get things running, and then you guys can be the ones, and we'll come and watch with you and see how everything works, just to make sure that the parents are getting the experience that they need out of this app as well, just to keep them informed of what's going on.
That's a great idea.
So I have 2 or 3 parents actually on the
The
back
team.
burner right now that we're ready to go. So I know we've got just a couple minutes before we need to jump in executive session. So a couple of things that I want to at least kind of plant the seed a little bit, knowing full well that we're going to have more conversations around this here in the next couple of months. The organizational structure that we've had over the last couple of years was a little bit different this year, obviously. We used to have a director of transportation and safety that was covering both the transportation and the safety components here in the district. And we have a new structure here this year. We have a transportation supervisor who doesn't have the safety components on their plate, luckily, because there's so many transportation concerns here this year. And then we've had this safety compliance officer stipend. We're trying to figure out what does this look like here moving forward. Who takes the lead on school safety here in our district. Obviously, we put a priority on that in years past and had that person identified, but with people moving in and out, we don't have that same expertise, that same personnel, even that same position currently in the district. So we're having some conversations internally about what does that look like. And we would kind of put that out to you as well as a board, thinking through this, we need to tighten the belt, we know that, and we're working through some of that from a staffing standpoint. But again, we also want to make sure that we're getting some of the important things covered. So just kind of thinking through that in the back of your mind a little bit. Our safety team over the last couple of years, it was Bill Porter, Jen Skolsky, and Kristen before. This year it's been Bill Porter, me, and Kristen, with Bill, kind of jumping full go into Sterling Morton now as principal. We're trying to transition away from him so he can focus on his job. We're going to have Tim Hammond as part of that safety team, but then again, who else internally is part of that conversation? Do we incorporate business operations, technology, transportation? Who else might be part of that team moving forward? And again, who can take the lead in that role? Just a couple of things that we don't have answers to yet. But we wanted to put it out to our group here just to continue to think and, when we meet again, maybe having some additional conversations about, how we might approach this from an organizational structure standpoint for next
Couple
year.
of retirements in the central office, maybe, as you're reconfiguring.
Yes. And those are part of the conversations too. So those are some of the things that we want to continue to kind of think about as we move forward. Just a couple of final quick hitters here before we jump into executive session. From a planning standpoint, we're going to continue to update our safety plans on an annual basis. But we're also looking closely at our protocols again. Obviously, we had that security breach back in September that we've addressed here recently. How do we continue to educate our students and our staff in those protocols? Had conversation yesterday where, the police officers reiterated with us, we have nice kids. We do. And, somebody comes to the door, they're nice, they're going to let them in. So how do we reiterate that safety component with our students and with our staff members to question people as they're walking through the hallways? Hey, why are you here? Don't recognize you as a staff member. Can we help you find the office? Just reiterating some of that. So making sure that we have that in place. Also looking at student IDs as a possibility. I think they have them. They're probably sitting at home on their dresser somewhere. Is that where your daughters are?
I'm pretty sure.
Maggie? Okay. But, how do we look at that being more of a mandatory thing? Just so we want to reiterate and revise and update some of our protocols moving forward. And then the final thing I'll throw out as well is that possibility of maybe having some sort of board safety liaison committee. Obviously, we've got our financial piece to the puzzle. We've got our curriculum piece to the puzzle with our board liaison committee. And do we incorporate maybe a couple of you in maybe a board safety liaison committee? Might be a recommendation that we're looking at here as we enter next school year. That way, we've got our safety team in place, but you guys are abreast of what's going on, and that group can report out to the rest of the board on all things safety as we move through the year with some of those meetings. Plus, I think it would just be interesting for you guys to sit in there with Chief Gunch and Chief Searles and Ken Filipiak and just hear some of those conversations because they are very rich conversations. So those are a couple of things that we're going to continue to talk about, and we'll just need some additional guidance and some additional suggestions from this group as we move forward. All right. The rest of the conversations that we have here this evening would need to be an executive session.
Are you going to mention Neola policy? Before we wrap up, or are we running out of time?
Just the final 2 bullet points. Communication, I know we have a public-facing video that we're talking about updating. That's something that Kristen talked about yesterday a little bit. And then, obviously, we're going through the Neola Policy Manual, and we'll have that group that's, and I can't remember who's part of that chapter, but when we do the school safety Neola policy updates, we'll make sure and have the 2 of you that are part of that chapter updated on those things. So those are items to come here this spring. All right. So, do I make that
Thank you.
recommendation to go to executive session, or Tom?
No, I can make that recommendation.
Second.
Please call the roll, Mr. Wade.
Ms. Briner?
Yes.
Ms. Jessling?
Yes.
Ms. Cook?
Yes.
Ms. Payne?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
6:49, or 6:50, excuse me. Headed into executive session.
Yeah.